Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon. Teonna Rainwater's harrowing upbringing in 1923 is based on a true story. Yellowstone prequel 1923 has a harrowing true story at its heart as Teonna Rainwater, played by Amina Neves, expected to be a direct ancestor of Thomas Rainwater, Gil Birmingham, is seen being beaten and tormented by nuns at the Catholic school for Indigenous children. Teonna may have taken her revenge in the first season, but she is not out of the woods yet as she remains on the run. Teonna's dark story comes from true tales of when government-funded boarding schools used to beat and abuse Indigenous children. According to Pajiba.com, the children were not allowed to wear their own clothes or speak their native language. They could not even use their real names. Like in the series, their hair was cut short and they were forced to learn American religious education. The website explained, the children spent as many as 10 years in these schools, and once they returned to their reservations, they often had difficulty re-assimilating at home, leaving them in a sort of cultural no-man's land where they were not accepted by either Americans or the reservations. As 1923 depicts, the school's aim was to kill the Indian, save the man. In one particular school in Michigan, more than 230 children died between the years of 1893 and 1931. Just like how Teonna's journey in 1923 has played out, bounties were paid for children who tried to run away. 1923 paints a relatively historically accurate picture of what transpired inside boarding schools, which were founded by Western settlers specifically to attempt to forcibly assimilate Indigenous communities displaced by the westward expansion of America. Only one of these schools was actually founded in Montana, the Fort Shaw Indian School, with a higher concentration in states like Oklahoma, Minnesota, and South Dakota. Jennifer L., who played Sister Mary in the first season, told Screen Rant, "Sister Mary is a person who believes, as the people who were running these residential schools actually did believe, that you had to kill the Indian to save the man. You had to force assimilation. You had to remove all cultural identity from these children who had been removed forcibly from their families and were living in isolation." Most of these boarding schools have now either been closed or heavily reformed, but the culture of abuse has left permanent scars for those involved. Teonna actress Amina shared, "Being Indigenous, it's our duty to tell our stories and to tell them as strongly, quickly, and powerfully as we can. It's what we're born into, and we're storytellers from the jump. You know what I'm saying? Continuing to tell our story as honestly as we can is very important." Teonna Rainwater's story in 1923 is a harrowing depiction of the brutal realities faced by Indigenous people in early 20th century America. While Teonna is a fictional character, her experiences are deeply rooted in historical truth. The series does not shy away from showcasing the cruel and dehumanizing treatment Indigenous children endured in government and church-run boarding schools, a system designed to erase their culture, language, and identity. Her painful journey is a tribute to the resilience of Native communities who survived these atrocities. From the moment Teonna is introduced, the audience witnesses the horrors of the Catholic boarding school, where she and other Native children are forcibly taken from their families. These institutions, often run by missionaries with the supposed aim of civilizing Indigenous youth, were notorious for their rampant abuse. Physical punishment, emotional torment, and forced labor were common, and Teonna's story mirrors the accounts of thousands of real Native children who suffered under these conditions. In 1923, Teonna is depicted as a strong-willed young woman who refuses to have her identity stripped away. She is frequently beaten by the nuns for speaking her language, a punishment that was tragically common in these schools. Historical records show that Indigenous children were forbidden from speaking their native tongues. Those caught were often subjected to harsh discipline, including beatings, forced isolation, or food deprivation. The goal was clear: complete assimilation into white society by breaking the children's connection to their heritage. One of the most gut-wrenching aspects of Teonna's story is the sexual abuse she and others endured at the hands of their supposed caretakers. Many survivors of real-life boarding schools have spoken about the rampant sexual violence that took place behind closed doors. The clergy and other authority figures took advantage of their unchecked power, and justice was rarely served. Many Native families never learned the full extent of what their children endured, as shame and fear kept many victims silent for decades. The inhumane conditions at these schools extended beyond abuse. Children were malnourished, forced to perform labor-intensive tasks, and kept in unsanitary dormitories. Disease outbreaks were common, and countless Indigenous children never made it home. The mortality rate in some institutions was alarmingly high, with children buried in unmarked graves, a painful reality that has only recently come to light, with the discovery of mass burial sites at former boarding schools in the U.S. and Canada. Teonna's eventual escape is a powerful moment of defiance and survival. While some Indigenous children did manage to flee these schools, doing so was fraught with danger. Many were hunted down and dragged back, punished even more severely for daring to reclaim their freedom. Those who did escape often faced harsh wilderness conditions and had to rely on their traditional knowledge to survive. In 1923, Teonna's flight is not just about physical survival. It is an act of reclaiming her humanity, a testament to the strength and resilience of her people. Her journey after escaping highlights another harsh reality: the relentless pursuit and persecution of Indigenous people. The government, churches, and even local authorities were complicit in ensuring that Native children remained in these institutions. Families who resisted often faced legal repercussions or violent retaliation. The systemic oppression of Native communities extended far beyond the boarding schools. It was a calculated effort to dismantle Indigenous culture altogether. Teonna's struggle also sheds light on the role of kinship and the importance of community in Indigenous survival. Throughout history, Native people have relied on their families, tribes, and allies to endure oppression. Many children who escaped boarding schools were sheltered by relatives or sympathetic members of other tribes. In 1923, we see how Teonna's connections help her navigate the perilous road ahead, mirroring the real-life networks of support that many Indigenous survivors relied upon. Though Teonna's story is set in 1923, the generational trauma caused by these schools persists today. Indigenous communities continue to grapple with the impact of forced assimilation, the loss of language and cultural traditions, and the deep scars left by abuse and displacement. The revelations of mass graves at residential schools in recent years have brought renewed attention to this dark chapter of history, forcing governments and religious institutions to acknowledge their role in these crimes. The power of 1923 lies in its ability to bring these historical injustices to the forefront. While Teonna Rainwater is a fictional character, her story is emblematic of the thousands of Indigenous children who lived and died through similar experiences. Her defiance, resilience, and determination to reclaim her identity serve as a tribute to the real-life survivors and their descendants who continue to fight for justice, healing, and the preservation of their culture. By telling stories like Teonna's, 1923 contributes to a broader conversation about Indigenous history and the need for truth and reconciliation. The pain of the past cannot be undone, but acknowledging it is a crucial step toward ensuring that such atrocities are never repeated. Teonna Rainwater's harrowing journey is not just a tale of survival, it is a reminder of the strength, endurance, and unbreakable spirit of Indigenous people.